Henry Philippe Bonini Omar Joseph Pétain was born in Cochy-le-Tour in 1856. Pétain joined the French army in 1876 and attended the Saint-Cyr Military Academy in 1887 and the Army War College in Paris. Between 1878 and 1899, he served in various garrisons with different battalions. Pétain's career progressed slowly, as he rejected the French army philosophy of the furious infantry assault, arguing instead that firepower kills. His views were later proved to be correct during the First World War. He was promoted to captain in 1890 and major in 1900. In the spring of 1914, he was given command of a brigade. At the end of August 1914, he was quickly promoted to brigadier general and given command of the 6th Division in time for the First Battle of the Marne, little over a month later, in October 1914. He was promoted again and became 33rd Corps commander. In July 1915, he was given command of the 2nd Army. He acquired a reputation as one of the more successful commanders of the Western Front. Pétain conducted some successful but limited offenses in the later part of 1917, unlike the British who stalled in an unsuccessful offensive at Passchendaele that autumn. Pétain instead held off from major French offenses until the Americans arrived in force on the front lines, which did not happen until the early summer of 1918. He was also waiting for the new Renault FT tanks to be introduced in large numbers, hence his statement at the time, "I am waiting for tanks and the Americans." By the time of the last German offensive, Pétain was able to defend in depth and launch counter-offensives with the new French tanks and the assistance of the United States. After the war ended, Pétain was made Marshal of France on November 21st, 1918. Pétain was summoned to be present at the signing of the Treaty of Versailles on the 28th of June, 1919. His job as commander-in-chief came to an end with peace and demobilization, and it was Pétain who was appointed vice-chairman of the revived Supreme War Council. Pétain was a bachelor until his 60s and known for his womanizing. After the war, Pétain married his former girlfriend, Eugenie Hardon, on the 14th of September, 1920. She had no children by Pétain, but already had a son from her first marriage, Pierre de Héroun, whom Pétain strongly disliked. Pétain was appointed Inspector General of the Army in February 1922 and produced the new Army manual entitled Provisional Instruction on the Tactical Employment of Large Units. On September 3, 1925, Pétain was appointed sole commander-in-chief of French forces in Morocco to launch a major campaign against the Rif tribes, in concert with the Spanish army, which was successfully concluded by the end of October. He was subsequently decorated at Toledo by King Alfonso XIII with the Spanish Medalla Militar. Political unease was sweeping the country, and on February 6, 1934, the Paris police fired on a group of far-right rioters outside the Chamber of Deputies, killing 14 and wounding a further 236. President Lebrun invited 71-year-old Dumergue to come out of retirement and form a new government of national unity. Pétain was invited on February 8th to join the new French cabinet as Minister of War. His important success that year was getting Daladier's previous proposal to reduce the number of officers repealed. He improved the recruitment program for specialists and lengthened the training period by reducing leave entitlements. Pétain accompanied President Lebrun to Belgrade, Yugoslavia, for the funeral of King Alexander, who had been assassinated on October 6, 1934. Here he met Hermann Göring, and the two reminisced about their experiences in the Great War. Pétain traveled to Warsaw, Poland, for the funeral of the Polish Marshal Pilsudski in May 1935 and another cordial meeting with Göring. On the 1st of March 1935, Pétain's famous article appeared in the Revue des Deux Mondes, where he reviewed the history of the army since 1927-1928. He criticized the reservist system in France and her lack of adequate air power and armor. This article appeared just 5 days before Adolf Hitler's announcement of Germany's new air force and a week before the announcement that Germany was increasing its army to 36 divisions. In March 1939, Pétain became the French ambassador to Spain. However, on May 18, 1940, after Germany invaded France, Pétain joined the new government of Paul Renoude. Renoude hoped that the hero of the Verdun might instill a renewed spirit of resistance and patriotism in the French army. Reportedly, the Spanish dictator Francisco Franco advised Pétain against leaving his diplomatic post in Madrid. On May 24th, the invading Germans pushed back the French army. General Maxim Weygand expressed his fury at British retreats and the unfulfilled promise of British fighting aircraft. He and Pétain regarded the military situation as hopeless. On June 5th, following the fall of Dunkirk, there was a cabinet reshuffle, and Prime Minister Renaud brought the newly promoted Brigadier General de Gaulle into his war cabinet. Pétain was displeased at de Gaulle's appointment. Paris was now threatened, and the government was preparing to depart, although Pétain was opposed to such a move. On June 10th, the government left Paris for Tours. The government moved to Bordeaux, where French governments had fled German invasions in 1870 and 1914. On Sunday, June 16, President Roosevelt replied to President Lebrun's request for assistance, came with only vague promises and saying that it was impossible for the president to do anything without congressional approval. Pétain then drew a letter of resignation from his pocket. Lebrun persuaded him to stay until Churchill's reply had been received. After lunch, Churchill's telegram arrived agreeing to the armistice provided the French fleet was moved to British ports. Lebrun reluctantly accepted Renaud's resignation as prime minister on June 16 and felt he had little choice but to appoint Pétain in his place. A new cabinet with Pétain as head of the government was formed. On 12:30 a.m. on June 15, 1940, Pétain made his first broadcast to the French people. On June 22nd, France signed an armistice at Compiègne with Nazi Germany that gave Germany control over the north and west of the country, including Paris and all of the Atlantic coastline, but left the rest, around 2/5 of France's pre-war territory, unoccupied. On June 29th, the French government moved to Clermont-Ferrand, where the first discussions of constitutional changes were mooted. On July 1st, the government, finding Clermont too cramped, moved to Vichy, the empty hotels there being more suitable for the government ministries. His regime soon took on clear authoritarian and fascist characteristics. By January 1941, Pétain had virtually all governing power in France. He added that the new France would be a social hierarchy, rejecting the false idea of the natural equality of men. The new government immediately used its new powers to order harsh measures, including the dismissal of Republican civil servants, the proclamation of anti-Semitic laws, and the imprisonment of opponents and foreign refugees. Censorship was imposed, and freedom of expression and thought were effectively abolished with the reinstatement of the crime of felony of opinion. He and his government collaborated with Nazi Germany and even produced a legion of volunteers to fight in Soviet Russia. Pétain's government was nevertheless internationally recognized, notably by the United States. Neither Pétain nor his successive deputies gave significant resistance to requests by the Nazis to indirectly aid the Axis powers. However, when Adolf Hitler met Pétain at Montreuil in October 1940 to discuss the French government's role in the new European order, the Marshal listened to Hitler in silence. Not once did he offer a sympathetic word for Germany. Still, the handshake he offered to Hitler caused much uproar in London, England, and probably influenced Britain's decision to lend the Free French naval support for the operation at Gabon. Following the British attacks of July and September 1940, the French government became increasingly fearful of the British and took the initiative to collaborate with the occupiers. Pétain accepted the government's creation of a collaborationist armed militia under the command of Joseph Darnand, who, with German forces, led a campaign of repression against the French resistance. On November 11, 1942, German forces invaded the unoccupied zone of southern France in response to the Allies' Operation Torch landings in North Africa and Admiral François Darlan's agreement to support the Allies. Although the French government nominally remained in existence, Pétain became nothing more than a figurehead, as the Germans had negated the pretense of an independent government at Vichy. Following the liberation of France on September 7, 1944, Pétain and other members of the French cabinet at Vichy were relocated by the Nazis to the Sigmaringen enclave in Germany. where they became a government in exile until April 1945. Pétain, however, having been forced to leave France, refused to participate in this government, and on April 5, 1945, Pétain wrote a note to Hitler expressing his wish to return to France. No reply ever came. However, on his birthday almost 3 weeks later, he was taken to the Swiss border. 2 days later, he crossed the French frontier. The provisional government headed by de Gaulle placed Pétain under trial, which took place from July 23rd to August 15, 1945, for treason. Dressed in the uniform of a Marshal of France, at the end of Pétain's trial, he was convicted on all charges. The jury sentenced him to a death by a one-vote majority. Due to his advanced age, the court asked that his sentence not be carried out. De Gaulle, who was president of the provisional government of the French Republic at the end of the war, commuted the sentence to life imprisonment due to Pétain's age and his military contributions in World War I. After his conviction, the court stripped Pétain of all military ranks and honors, save for the one distinction of Marshal of France. Over the following years, Pétain's lawyers and many foreign governments and dignitaries, including Queen Mary and the Duke of Windsor, appealed to successive French governments for Pétain's release. But given the unstable state of Fourth Republic politics, no government was willing to risk unpopularity by releasing him. As early as June 1946, U.S. President Harry Truman interceded in vain for his release, even offering to provide political asylum in the U.S. A similar offer was later made by the Spanish dictator General Franco. Although Pétain had still been in good health for his age at the time of his imprisonment, by late 1947 his memory lapses were worsening, and he was beginning to suffer from incompetence. By January 1949, his lucid intervals were becoming fewer and fewer. By May, Pétain required constant nursing care, and he was often suffering from hallucinations. By the end of 1949, Pétain was completely senile, with only occasional moments of lucidity. On June 8, 1951, French President Héroult informed that Pétain had little longer to live, commuted his sentence to confinement in hospital, but by then, Pétain was too ill to be moved. He died on July 23, 1951, at the age of 95, and is buried in Marvin Cemetery near the prison.